My name is Emily Carter, and for 7 years I was lucky enough to be married to the love of my life, Michael. We met at a local diner in Asheville, North Carolina. I was working the night shift as a nurse, and he was coming off a long construction job. We both ordered the same late-night breakfast combo and laughed at the coincidence. That moment, it felt like something clicked. Michael was warm, patient, and endlessly supportive. He used to say, "You keep people alive, Emily. I just build things." But I never saw it that way. He built more than houses. He built our life. We weren't rich, but we had a small, cozy home on the edge of town, 2 golden retrievers named Max and Daisy, and dreams that stretched far beyond our front porch. His family never really liked me. His mom, Linda, thought Michael could done better. She once told me, "You're nice, but nurses don't exactly marry into our family." I tried to let it go. Michael always defended me, and I didn't marry him for his family's approval. Things changed when Michael got sick. Stage I pancreatic cancer. It came out of nowhere and hit us like a freight train. I quit my job to take care of him full-time. The hospital visits, the pain management, the sleepless nights. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. I still remember the way he used to squeeze my hand when the chemo got too much. He'd whisper, "I'm still here, Em. I'm still fighting." And then he was gone, just like that. One day I was helping him sip soup from a spoon, the next I was signing his death certificate. But the worst part didn't come with his death. It came after. When his family showed up, not to grieve, but to take. The funeral was held on a rainy Thursday. Michael would have hated it. He always said rain made people feel heavier. I had planned something simple and personal, just close friends, some of his co-workers, and the pastor from our local church. But Linda, his mother, showed up like she was running the whole thing. She changed the location last minute to a bigger funeral home in the city, saying Michael deserves better than some small-town setup. She didn't ask, she just did it. I had to reinform everyone the night before, scrambling to keep things from falling apart. At the funeral, I felt invisible. She stood next to the casket like a widow herself, greeting guests as if I didn't exist. I tried to speak during the service, to say something, anything, but she cut me off. "Let's keep it brief," she whispered, right before I took the podium. Michael's siblings, Brian and Samantha, barely looked at me. Brian had that smug expression like he was waiting for something. Samantha just scrolled through her phone in the back row. After the service, Linda pulled me aside. No hug, no condolences, just cold eyes and a colder voice. She said, "You'll need to move out of the house by the end of next week. Michael would have wanted it to stay in the family." I froze. "Excuse me?" She repeated it slower this time, like I was stupid. "You've been living in our family home long enough. It's time you find your own place." I wanted to scream. That house wasn't hers. Michael and I bought it together. We picked out the paint, the floors, even the dumb little wind chimes on the porch. That was our home. But then it hit me. The deed, the mortgage, everything was in Michael's name. When we bought it, he said it was just easier that way. "You're my wife," he told me. "It's ours, no matter what the paperwork says." I believed him. I never thought I'd have to fight for my own home. But his death didn't just break my heart. It was about to break everything else too. I only had 10 days to leave the house. 10 days to pack up the life Michael and I built together like it was just some temporary stop. Linda had a lawyer send me a formal notice. It said I had no legal claim to the property and that I was occupying it unlawfully. I sat at the kitchen table holding that letter, shaking. It didn't feel real. The house was full of memories. Michael fixing the leaky sink in the kitchen, dancing barefoot with me in the living room after a long shift, falling asleep on the porch swing during Sunday afternoons. How do you pack those things in a box? One afternoon, Brian showed up without warning. He brought a pickup truck and 2 of his friends. "We're here to start collecting some of Michael's stuff," he said, like it was the most casual thing in the world. I told him no, that this wasn't the time, that I was still grieving. He laughed and said, "We're just grabbing what's ours before you run off with everything." They went through the house like they owned it. Took Michael's tools, his guitar, even his old watch, one he'd worn every day for years. I begged them to leave the photo albums alone, but they didn't listen. By the end of that day, the house felt gutted. Not just of things, but of warmth. I moved into the basement of a friend's house on the other side of town. I had a few bags of clothes, a couple of books, and a box of keepsakes that somehow made it through Brian's looting. But the thing that hurt most? They took the house. But they were also trying to erase the proof that I was ever part of Michael's life. Grief is supposed to be the hardest part, but for me it was what came after. The silence, the legal walls. The realization that love meant nothing on paper. I started calling lawyers. One after another, they all said the same thing. Do you have a will? No. Is your name on the deed? No. Do you have any documented financial contribution? Some receipts, bank transfers, but nothing official. They were kind, but blunt. Without a will and without your name on anything, the law sees you as a guest, maybe even a squatter. That word, squatter, cut deeper than I expected. I had cared for Michael through the worst months of his life. I had given up my job, my sleep, my strength. I watched the man I loved fade away in my arms, and now I was being told I didn't exist. To make things worse, Linda filed a petition to claim Michael's life insurance. I had no idea she even knew about it. He always said, if anything happens to me, you'll be taken care of. I trusted that. But apparently Michael never updated the beneficiary paperwork after we got married. Guess who was still listed? Linda Carter. I tried to contest it, but the insurance company said their hands were tied. The form is clear, they told me. It doesn't matter what he said, it matters what he signed. It felt like every piece of Michael, his home, his belongings, even his final wishes, was being taken from me. And I didn't know where to turn next. I was ready to give up. I really was. I spent my days numb, drifting between the basement couch and the grocery store down the block. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat much. I stopped checking the mailbox. Every letter felt like a reminder that the world had moved on without me. One afternoon, I went back to the old house. I don't even know why. Maybe I wanted to see it one last time before Linda sold it. Maybe I just wanted to feel close to Michael again. I parked across the street and stared at the porch. The wind chimes we picked out together were still hanging there, rusty, motionless. Something pulled me toward the side door, the one that led to the garage. I still had my old key. I slipped it in, and to my surprise, it turned. The garage was mostly empty, but in the far corner there was an old filing cabinet Michael used to keep random papers in. Receipts, warranty cards, tax stuff. I don't know what I was looking for. Closure, maybe? Proof that he hadn't just vanished? And that's when I found it. A handwritten letter, folded in an envelope labeled "For Emily, if anything happens." It was dated just 3 weeks before he died. In the letter, Michael wrote, I never got around to finalizing my will, but I want it to be known. Everything I have should go to Emily. The house, the insurance, the savings, the car, it's all hers. She took care of me when no one else did. She's my wife. She's my everything. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing. I sat down on the cold concrete floor and read it over and over until the ink blurred through my tears. This might be what I needed. Maybe not to win everything back, but to be heard. The next morning, I made an appointment with a local attorney. Her name was Ava Jennings. She had once worked with Michael on a small property dispute years ago. When I showed her the letter, she sat in silence for a moment, then looked me straight in the eye and said, This changes things. Ava moved fast. She filed an emergency petition to pause the sale of the house and freeze Michael's insurance payout until the court could review the letter. I was terrified. I didn't know what would happen, if it was even legal. But Ava said, Let's give your voice a chance to be heard. We submitted the handwritten letter, along with photos of me caring for Michael, joint receipts, text messages, and witness statements from friends and neighbors who saw our life together. The court agreed to open a hearing. That's when things turned ugly. Linda hired an aggressive attorney, someone slick, polished, the kind of man who smiles with his teeth but not his eyes. At the first hearing, he called me a woman with no legal standing and claimed I was manipulating grief for financial gain. I sat in the courtroom while he painted me as some sort of opportunist, a gold digger who latched onto Michael for his modest savings. Brian and Samantha nodded like puppets beside their mother, who sat stone-faced. Ava stood up and fought back, hard. She spoke with fire in her voice, laying out the timeline, showing evidence of our shared life, the love, the caregiving, the intent behind Michael's letter. She argued that while the law favors paperwork, the truth still matters. But the hardest moment? When Linda took the stand and said she was just a phase, Michael was going to leave her, he told me so. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Then Ava leaned over and whispered, "We've got this. Don't let her take your truth." And somehow, I didn't break. The final hearing came on a cold Friday morning. I wore Michael's old flannel jacket over my dress. It still smelled faintly like him, cedar wood and coffee. It gave me strength. The courtroom was silent as the judge reviewed everything, the letter, the statements, the photos, the years of shared life. Then came the ruling. The judge acknowledged that legally things were complicated. There was no formal will, no joint ownership. But, he said, intent can matter, especially when it's as clear and heartfelt as this. He ruled that I was entitled to the house and a portion of Michael's life insurance. Not all of it, but enough to live and rebuild. The rest, unfortunately, would still go to Linda as the named beneficiary. I should have felt victorious. But I didn't. Linda stood up and shouted, "This is a disgrace. She manipulated him. She was nothing." Security had to escort her out. Brian stormed off. Samantha didn't even look at me. And I just sat there, numb, tired, relieved, yes, but not happy. Ava leaned in and said, "You did this. You stood up for yourself, for your truth. That matters more than any signature." She was right. I walked out of that courthouse not as Michael's widow, not in their eyes anyway, but as my own person, standing on my own 2 feet, holding on to the last piece of the life we built together. And that was something no one could ever take away. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of a little yellow cottage by the coast of South Carolina. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I sold the old house in Asheville, not out of anger, but because I needed a fresh start. I used part of the insurance settlement to open a small bakery on Main Street. I named it Michael's Wish. People asked about the name all the time. I'd just smile and say, "It's a long story, but it ends sweet." I still miss him, every single day. There are moments when I catch myself reaching for my phone to text him or pausing in a store because I saw his favorite snack. Grief doesn't vanish, it just softens. But for the first time in a long time, I feel peace. I built a life from the ashes of what they tried to take from me. I didn't just fight for a house or money. I fought for the truth of our love, for the years we had, for the promise we made, even if it was never signed in ink. Sometimes customers linger in the shop, watching me knead dough or frost cupcakes. One older woman once said, "You look like someone who's lost something but found herself." And maybe that's true. Because I lost Michael, but in the process, I found me.